Good morning, evening, or afternoon, or whenever you might be watching this. My name is Professor Ferrero, and welcome back to U.S. History 1877 to the present. In our last lecture, in lecture 6.1, we talked about the Roaring Twenties, how great the economy was doing. Everything was doing great. Everything was fantastic. Easy money. Just overall, a really great time, like most people's 20s. But once you're done with your 20s, the Great Depression hits and you are in your 30s. So, with all of that being said, today we are going to be doing a bit of a shorter lecture because we're mostly going to be exploring the causes and the problems of the Great Depression before we move on to the New Deal. So, a little bit of a recap. World War I ends, and the U.S. is going to ride a economic high of easy money, of companies growing constantly, but all of that is going to come crashing down in 1929 with the stock market crash of 1929. Companies had been very overvalued. Basically, companies are telling the public, they're telling the consumer that they are worth more than they actually are. Their stocks had been overvalued, they had been overpriced. This is going to be a period known as speculation. Many companies are being dishonest about how much they're earning, and because of this, people's money is going to vanish virtually overnight. There are a lot of factors that lead into the Great Depression, but one of the biggest issues with it is that, again, everybody thinks the economy is doing great. Everybody thinks these companies are doing way better than they actually are, and they're not. And so because of that, these companies, they end up crashing. Because of the failing economy, people are going to panic. They're going to start withdrawing money from the banks. The big issue with that, though, is when you put your money in the bank, it doesn't just sit there. It's not like they put a locked box. They go ahead. For me, they would put a Ferrero. For you, they would go ahead, they put your name. They go ahead and they invest your money. Realistically, they're only keeping about 10 to 20% of the actual money you put in the bank on hand. The rest of it, they're investing in the market. That's why if you go ahead and you look at the end of each month, your bank usually gives you a couple of cents, maybe a few dollars if you have a good bank, gives you a little bit of money at the end of the month because they are investing your money. They are using your money to make money. Banks aren't just a charity. They aren't doing it for fun. So because of that, when the stock market crashes, all of that money that they had invested in the market also goes away. That money is going to vanish virtually overnight. Because the stock market crashes, people are going to go ahead and they're going to start panicking. They start withdrawing their money from the bank. They get freaked out. The banks, though, they don't have enough money to give to the people. I may have invested $20,000 and everybody else may have invested maybe another $1 million, but the bank might only have $30,000 on hand. If I'm the first in line and I ask for all of my money, they only have $10,000. The next guy in line asks for 15, they're going to say, sorry, all I have is 10. And the bank's now out of money. This is going to be known as a bank run. Banks start to fail. Because of that, people at other banks get freaked out. They panic. They go ahead. They withdraw all their money, and more banks start to fail. It is a domino effect. Banks literally go out of business, leaving people without the money they had deposited. Nowadays, we have the FDIC to go ahead and protect against that. But those guardrails weren't put in place until this type of calamity happened. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to talk about the downward spiral that is the Great Depression. There's a lot of snowballing issues here. Because the market is down, companies are going to be making less money. Because for a multitude of reasons. One, they overproduce their products. Ford makes way more cars than they could possibly sell. Because of that, a lot of their inventory is going to go ahead and it's going to sit in warehouses because people can't afford it. Because people can't afford it, Ford isn't making as much money. So what do? They have two options. They can either lower wages or they can go ahead and they can fire employees. Okay? Well, you go ahead, you lower wages, you fire your employees. That means the people that are working for you now have less money to go ahead and buy your cars. Because the wages were lowered, consumers have even less buying power. Because of that, they're not going to be buying these companies' products. Because they're not buying these companies' products, They need to fire more employees, or they need to lower wages even more. Because they lower wages even more, they fire people, they're selling less product. It is a vicious cycle going down and down and down. And this is also going to lead to people panicking because they don't have a job anymore. They sell their stocks, and now the company's worth even less. And the banks are failing even more. Unemployment is going to skyrocket while companies have warehouses full of products they can't even sell. It's not a supply issue, it's an oversupply issue. And people start getting desperate during the Great Depression. This is the sad part of all of it as well. You're going to start seeing families which used to be well-to-do starting to scavenge in dumpsters for food. Some men even decide, I'm worth more dead than alive to my family. I have a life insurance policy on my head, so I might as well go ahead and commit suicide just so my family can at least get the insurance money. There's horrific stories of men lining up on bridges, jumping off because of how bad the Great Depression is. These men are deciding, I'm worth more to my family dead than I am alive. You can see right here, wouldn't be an uncommon sight. You have a bunch of working age men here in a soup kitchen line. They don't have a job. They would probably go ahead and they'd take a break from looking for jobs, maybe for lunch or maybe before they go out for breakfast. This is a soup kitchen line in Chicago. Here's another one in Brooklyn. Here in Brooklyn, you can see it's not even just white guys as well. You see people of African-American heritage here in this line as well. I think over here in the back. These bread lines are going to be pretty commonplace during this time period because, again, people don't have any money. They're out looking for jobs. And you see that here in this picture. You see these men walking around in suits. You saw them walking around in suits in the previous pictures. You might be asking, why are they doing that? It's because all they're going out doing is looking for work. You can see these men literally have posted on their chests their resumes. Wanted, decent job, family man. Wanted, decent job, war veteran. Paying for home and college trained. Families are so broke that these men are literally just wandering the streets looking for jobs. To make matters worse as well, you also have a massive ecological issue happen at the exact same time. So while manufacturing, the economy as a whole, is going to be crippled by the stock market crash of 1929, shortly thereafter in the early 1930s, the Dust Bowl is going to kick off. It's a huge, huge ecological issue that basically affects the dead center of the country. The farmland in this area right here had been over-farmed. If you know anything about agriculture, if you farm the soil too much, it's going to suck all of the nutrients out. If the nutrients aren't in the soil, the plants can't survive. The plants can't survive. There's nothing holding the soil in place. Again, it's another domino effect. Nothing's holding the dirt in place. Wind is going to be blowing. That's Tornado Alley, realistically. And because of that, that's why it's called the Dust Bowl. All of that dirt that used to be used to grow to crops is now just a giant dust storm. Farmers who worked this land for generations. This was farms that were owned by their grandparents and their great-grandparents. All these people know how to do is farm. They're going to go ahead and have to sell their farms, and they're going to have to go ahead and move out west, which is going to put them into competition with migrant workers out in California. This is where we get stories such as of John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. If you've never read it, it's about two farmhands who are looking for work out in the West. Obviously, there's a lot more to that story than that, but that's the setting of it. And again, you can see here the causes: drought, severe winds, erosion. Many hundreds of thousands of people are going to have to leave the area because of this. Here's a good picture of a dust storm in the Dust Bowl. It's massive. And if you can see, let me go ahead and zoom in on it right here. Where is it? These are people. These little itty bitty things here are people. And that's the dust storm. You can see how freaking massive this entire thing is. And this would be the aftermath often. This is all due to wind erosion. This is all due to over farming. On top of this too, since not enough crops are being grown, grocery prices are going to go up. It's supply and demand, which is further going to compound issues in the Great Depression. This is all going to lead to the Mexican Repatriation Act. So remember, those farmers that were from the dead center of the country, they're going to move out west towards California. And they're going to come into conflict with Mexican migrant workers in California. These are going to be people predominantly picking crops and fruits and things like that. During the 1930s, the state of California is going to give preference to the new white migrant workers over the historic Mexican ones. As a result, the state of California is going to deport a large chunk of the Mexican population. Maybe you might be more America first, maybe you might be more pro-American citizens, and I understand that. However, they deport 1.8 million Mexicans, but 60% of those were American citizens. So of that 1.8 million, about 1 million of them are American born and raised citizens or immigrants who had become naturalized citizens. A lot of these families had been here in California since before California was even a part of the United States. And they're going to be, you can't even say they were deported, they're going to get kicked out of the United States, forced back into Mexico. Imagine if this were you, if you were born here in the United States and you were kicked back to your ancestral homeland. If someone were to walk up to me and say, hey, Professor Ferrero, you're going back to Italy. I don't have any relationship to Italy. You might not have much of a relationship. These are people who were born and raised in the United States. It's not even a guarantee that they speak Spanish, and they're getting kicked out to another country. Ultimately, California isn't even going to apologize for these actions until 2005. You can see here in the pictures of Mexicans, again, many Mexican Americans, not even just Mexicans, Mexican Americans getting expelled from Los Angeles back to Mexico in 1931. And this is going to lead us to talk about the president of the Great Depression, or at least the start of it, and that is going to be Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was a bit of a wonderkin in terms of the politics of the early 1900s. He's one of those presidents where his resume before and after being president is way more impressive than him actually being president. He headed a lot of humanitarian efforts after World War I, helped with the rebuilding of Europe after the Great War. He had also been a part of both Harding and Coolidge's administrations as well, and he's going to do amazing work after. However, because of his efforts during the Great Depression, he's remembered as one of the worst presidents we've had in American history. If you talk to most historians, top 5, top 10 worst presidents, Hoover's going to be pretty high up there. He's criticized for ignoring the problems. His attitude, he's a laissez-faire president. His attitude is, don't worry, it's going to fix itself. We don't need to do anything about it. We'll get over it. It's fine. That's nice and all, but if I'm a voter and I lost my job and I'm struggling to feed my family and the president's telling me this isn't a real issue, I'm going to be pissed. I'm going to be angry. I'm going to kick this guy out of office, and that's exactly what happens to Hoover. First couple of years, he kind of says, don't worry, it's temporary, we're going to bounce back. We don't bounce back from it. We don't even bounce back from it with the president after until really, we don't get out of the Great Depression until World War II. In his later years of his term, he's going to do a lot to try and fix it. He becomes a lot more hands-on as a president. But by that point, the damage to his reputation is done. He can't do anything. He does do a lot to try and fix it, but everybody remembers him as the guy who neglected the problems. And he's going to fail to win re-election. And that's going to lead to a lot of people mocking him. You have these small little shanty towns start to pop up from people who don't have enough money to buy a home. And these homeless encampments, they're going to be mockingly called Hoovervilles, named after the president himself. And that is going to be where we're going to go ahead and end off with the Great Depression. Next lecture, we're going to go ahead and we are going to talk about the New Deal and the government's attempts to solve the economic woes of the Great Depression. There's a lot of issues that go into the Great Depression. And it's really important to remind ourselves that the economy and things aren't always going to go well forever. Nobody knows what big calamitous thing's going to happen, whether it's economic or whether it's political or military or cultural or even ecological. We're not guaranteed tomorrow. And that leads us to the question of what do we need to do today? And also, how ought the government respond to these things? These aren't things that I have an answer to, but I encourage you to think about. With all of that being said, if you have any questions about the lecture, please go ahead and post them down below. If you are currently in one of my classes, go ahead and write out any questions that you have. I'll go ahead and I'll try to answer any legitimate questions down in the comment section. If you liked the video, go ahead and please leave a like. I'd appreciate that. If not, totally fine as well. Other than that, you have a fantastic and wonderful day, and Ferrero out. Peace.